Well, it's wonderful to hear the fire announcement from Kit Salisbury, because without Kit, none of this would be happening. So it gives me an opportunity to thank her for all your work. And to thank the faculty, the staff, the students, and the administration, and really the university as a whole. This is a celebration of an extraordinary collaboration, the collaboration with Maestro Barenboim, with the West Eastern Divan Orchestra, with a new academy in Berlin that will be called the Barenboim-Said Academy, to open in 2015 and 16. It is an original program that started in part here in 2006, when the orchestra visited Providence for the first time. And when they left, they said they would come back. This was both a promise and a threat, I have to say, but we're very happy that both promise and threat have been realized, and that we can welcome them back in Providence for a residency of a whole week, including 2 concerts, Saturday and Monday at the VMA, and these 2 campus conversations. The collaboration between this orchestra and a university, and I would say especially and uniquely this university, is something that is a very ambitious and very unpredictable experiment. And I think it's fair to say that both the West Eastern Divan Orchestra and the university in general, but specifically this university, are dedicated to a certain kind of maverick knowledge. In the case of the orchestra, there is a kind of dual program of knowledge of music, and the knowledge of music that these musicians possess is extraordinary, and knowledge through music. And that's the more unpredictable formulation, the idea that there's a certain kind of knowledge that comes through music that is not really comfortable being articulated, but that has to do very deeply with the knowledge of the world, including the political world, the cultural world, and these different universes and all of their complicated structures. And this is the kind of conversation that goes on in the music, through the music, and when the music isn't playing in this organization. And in the last 6 or 7 years, a number of Brown students have participated in the summer programs near Seville, as well as in workshops in Berlin. And these have been extraordinary experiences, and it's very nice to see some of the alumni of these programs with us tonight. What we're doing tonight is really extraordinary, and that is we have a conversation around the mission of the university and the orchestra, but with 2 guest speakers. And it's a real delight for us to welcome Izzeldin Abuelaish and Miko Peled, who will begin the evening. They are both activists. They both have distinguished careers around them. They will describe these careers, I think. I don't want to preempt them. Each of them is the author of an important book that is a combined memoir with a kind of statement of reconciliation and dialogue. Dr. Abuelaish is the author of I Shall Not Hate, a recent book, and Miko Peled, The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. I think, Miko, you will start. And it's wonderful to have you here. Miko will be followed by Izzeldin. Then the plan is for Maestro Barenboim and Mariam Said to respond. And then we'll have some time to open up for a general discussion with all of you. And I've been asked to remind you that there are microphones on either side. And when the question period comes, if you could be so kind as to address questions from either one of those microphones. So thanks for being here on this cold night, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, assalamu alaikum to all of the shalom, erev tov, kol Yisraelim, and good evening to everybody. I apologize for my voice. As you can hear, I have laryngitis suddenly, so I hope you can hear me. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So I'll do my best to project. This is, I'm humbled and honored to be here tonight. This is an unbelievable gathering. I've known about this project, this orchestra for many, many years. I've admired both Maestro Barenboim and Edward Sayed practically my entire life. And it's an honor to meet Dr. Izzeldin tonight as well for the first time. And I want to thank you all for being here. I don't think I need to tell you how important it is to work on the issue of understanding and reconciliation so that having Israelis and Arabs and Jews and Arabs and so forth come to a point where it's really no big deal that they work together. It's not an issue, but it's completely normal. And so once again, thank you all for being here, and again, thank you all for the opportunity and to speak to you today. It's interesting. This is a topic about which many people care and many people have strong opinions and feelings. And I always like to warn people before I begin that the presentation I give is not what most people would consider a balanced presentation. My point of view is decidedly one-sided. And this is a very personal issue for me, as it is, I'm sure, for all of you and for many others. And I don't believe there's a balanced presentation on this issue out there at all anyway, because if you're out here speaking, you probably have a strong point of view. I'll also say that for Israelis particularly, and for people who care about the state of Israel, my presentation is very hard to hear. And so I'd like to put it out there in advance so you know what to expect. I'd like to begin, there's this myth out there that this is an intractable conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's been going on for centuries or hundreds of years, and these people out there have been killing each other forever, which of course is not true. And I gave a talk in front of an 8th grade class some 6 months ago. And in preparation for my talk, the 8th graders took a poll to see how many of them believed that there could be peace in their lifetime. 8th graders are 13 years old. And 80% of them, 80%, thought that there will not be peace in their lifetime. And they're 13 years old. And I said to them in my remarks that I'm 51, and there's no question in my mind that peace is not only possible, but is inevitable and will be achieved in our lifetime. And I wanted to ask you, as the audience tonight, if you'd raise your hand if you believe peace is possible in your lifetime. Can I see a show of hands? If you think peace, Israeli-Palestinian peace, is possible in your lifetime. Nice and high so I can see you. All right, thank you. How about who out there does not believe peace is possible in their lifetime? Yeah. Well, about 50-50. Anybody here just not sure? They're on the fence? Doesn't want to commit? Okay. Well, it's interesting. I've had audiences where we're either overwhelmingly one side or the other, but most people, in most cases, feel quite hopeless, which I think is very sad. There's also a lot of double standard on this issue. I'll give you one example that I like to kind of begin with. The whole issue of the State of Israel, the creation of the State of Israel, and Zionism, which is the ideology that created the State of Israel, is based on the notion, as I'm sure you know, that the Jewish people today, being that they are the descendants of the ancient Hebrews who used to live in that part of the world several thousands of years ago, have a right to live there. And the word that is used is they have a right to return. In other words, the State of Israel, the legitimacy for the creation of the State of Israel came from the right of Jewish people, not because they lived there or their grandparents or their ancestors, but because they have a relation to people who lived there thousands of years ago, and yet the word that is used that they have a right to return. And it's become completely and totally acceptable. Yet, when we talk about the right of Palestinians to return to their homes, we're talking about people who were forced to leave their homes only within the last 65 years. And the argument against that, well, there are many arguments against that are expressed, but what is being said usually is that, well, it was a long time ago, they need to forget. The past is behind us and they need to forget. So we somehow accept that people who never lived there but are related to an ancient tribe that lived there thousands of years ago have a right. But people who are still alive, that still have the deeds and the keys to their homes, do not have a right, and they have to stay in refugee camps. So this is an interesting double standard that we've somehow come to accept. I don't know if you know Rigoberto Menchú from Guatemala. She's a Nobel Peace Laureate. And she said something which struck me in an interview once, that people have the right to three things: to their memories, to the truth, and to justice. And I think this applies in this issue as well. And there's one issue, as I was learning about the Palestinian conflict, or about the Palestinian narrative, I should say, having come from a very patriotic Israeli family. My father was a general. My grandfather signed the Israeli Declaration of Independence. So I come from a very patriotic Israeli background. So I really never was exposed to the Palestinian issue. But I remember the first time I heard that the Palestinians referred to our war of independence, the Israeli war of independence, as a catastrophe. I was personally insulted the first time I heard this. And for years I thought, how can they call such an important event a catastrophe, such a positive thing, a disaster? And over the years, as I met Palestinians and I spoke to Palestinians and learned about the issue, I understood why this is so. But it wasn't until recently that I actually saw the catastrophe. These boys are, this is a picture. I saw two things. I was in Palestine just now. In fact, I came here last night from Palestine. And I was in two places. I was at the refugee camp in Jordan called the Gaza refugee camp. And then I was in Gaza itself. And that is when, for the very first time, I saw the catastrophe. People who live not an hour and a half drive from Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, living in such abject poverty, seeing the sadness, seeing the destruction. And we're not talking about some remote sub-Saharan place, far away with natural disasters and people who have never gone to school. We're talking about an educated society, an educated population who live an hour and a half to 2 hours from Tel Aviv and from Jerusalem, who live in terrible poverty, who are exposed to this type of destruction, who don't know if this is going to be the fate of their own home tomorrow, who have to see this every day as they go to work or they go to school, because sites like this are quite common in Gaza now, who have to live in refugee camps with no water, no running water, no bathrooms. Yet every house, if you can call it a house, that I have seen, spotlessly clean. And where, in order to enter or leave, in order to sustain an economy of close to 2 million people in Gaza, you have to go through this, which is how I got in and out. It's a tunnel across a boundary which is less than 10 miles. There are 1,000 or close to 1,500 tunnels. And this is how 2 million people in Gaza sustain themselves. This is the Nakba. This is a catastrophe, and it's not something that happened 65 years ago. This is something that has been happening for 65 years and still happens today. And like I say, these are impressions. This is something that I only saw over the last 3-4 weeks. And so I thought I would share this with you. This is the inside of one of the tunnels going into Gaza. I heard, I was listening to some talks that Dr. Izzeldin gave on YouTube, on the internet. Thank God for the internet. There's so much that we can see. And he talked about the need to diagnose the conflict, just like you would diagnose a disease in order to come to a good understanding of how to solve it. And in my opinion, in order to diagnose it correctly, we have to be aware and to come to terms with how the problem began. And I think the 29th of November, 1947 is a good time to start talking about this. It's a time where we can really understand where the problem lies. And I'm sure many of you know, it was that day that the United Nations came up with this ridiculous map. It's called a partition map, or the partition plan. In 1947, there were two communities living in Palestine at the time. There were the Palestinians, who were the native community, numbering close to 1.5 million people. And there's a small community of immigrants, Jewish immigrants, that numbered less than 500,000 people. Yet the United Nations decided to partition the country and give the small community of immigrants the larger portion of the country. And to this day, you hear people say, you see, it's all the Palestinians' fault because they didn't accept this. Who in their right mind would accept this? Why would anybody accept that the United Nations would come, chop off the larger portion of their country, and give it to a small group of immigrants? Who in their right mind thought that somebody would accept this? And of course, I don't think anybody thought that they would accept it, and this map, of course, didn't last a single day, because immediately after this, what we call the War of Independence began, and what the Palestinians call the Nakba began. And the story that we hear, of course, as Israelis, as Americans, that the Arabs attacked, that immediately after the United Nations passed that resolution, that the Arabs attacked in a desire to destroy the small Jewish community. And somehow, miraculously, because we, the Israelis, are the descendants of the Maccabees, and we, the Israelis, are the descendants of King David, we managed to prevail. And now we have the Jewish state. But when you learn about the issue a little bit more in depth, you realize, and you have to ask yourself, who are these Arabs that attacked? Who exactly attacked? Because at that time, in 1947, while the Jewish community already had a strong militia of close to 40,000 armed men, in which my father was an officer, there was no equivalent on the Palestinian side. The other Arab countries didn't intervene until 6-7 months later. So who exactly are the Arabs that attacked? And then we realized there were no Arabs that attacked. Precisely at that moment, the Zionist community, the Jewish community, began a massive campaign of terrorism and ethnic cleansing that lasted 12 months, at the end of which 80% of the country was conquered, close to 1 million people were expelled, and hundreds of towns and villages were destroyed, some of them as old as 1,000 years, including churches and mosques and hospitals and, of course, homes. Now, when I was working on the book, I tried to, it's a memoir, so there's a lot of, personal stories and personal issues. And this is a picture of my mother. And there's a story that she told me as I was growing up many, many times. She was born and raised in Jerusalem. She still lives there. She's 86 years old now. And the story that she told me was that during the war of 1948, when the Palestinian communities of Jerusalem, I'm not talking about the old city of Jerusalem, I'm talking about outside the old city, were taken by the Israeli forces and forced to leave, their homes were made available to, and we heard about this last night too, their homes were made available to Israeli families. And because she was the wife of an officer who was fighting for the cause, she had 2 young children, she was offered one of these homes. She was living in a small apartment with her mother. And her reaction was, and this is still her reaction when we talk about this today, it was, how could I possibly take the home of another family? How could I move into the home of another mother who now has to raise her family in a refugee camp in exile? And it wasn't until recently that I was actually working on the book, or the last couple of years, that I understood why this story bothered me for so many years. There was something about this story that always bothered me, and I realized what it was. It was contradicting the national narrative. The narrative that we hear as Israelis is, they attacked us, we won, they left. So why can't we take their homes? She was presenting a story that said that we did something wrong, fundamentally wrong. And she presents a moral issue here. Another thing that she did, which was interesting to me because it's not often that you hear this, is she placed Palestinians on an equal footing with Israelis. Because everything that Israelis do to Palestinians, regardless how morally wrong, how unjust, is always justified, is always explained. And she said, the way she told the story is that this is unjustifiable, inexcusable. And it's not something that you hear in Israeli discourse very much. Going back to the history, this is what the map looks like after the our war of independence after 48. The Gaza Strip, the West Bank were not part of the State of Israel yet. And of course, the Golan Heights were not a part of Israel. And these were areas that Israel had wanted over the years. The Israeli generals were very disappointed that they couldn't take the West Bank in 48. And as you know, in 1967, the drums of war began beating again when the Egyptian president decided to bring his forces into the Sinai Peninsula in the spring and early summer of 1967. And once again, we hear that in the 1967 war, Israel was faced with an existential threat and had to engage in a preemptive strike. Now, my father was a general by then, and like the title of the book is A General's Son, so there's quite a bit about him. This is a picture of him. And I knew this was not true, that there was no threat, because he said that from the very beginning. But as I was working on the book, I went into the Israeli Army archives to learn about his career. And one of the things that I looked at were the minutes of the meetings of the generals leading up to the 1967 war, the days and the weeks leading up. And in those meetings, now these many people have written about this. There's been a lot of history and so forth about this. But the first thing that struck me as I was reading the minutes of these meetings that I had not seen anywhere else is where they say that they were talking about the Egyptian army, which is really the only significant army, Arab army, is actually not prepared for war. That the Egyptian army had given Israel an opportunity to attack it and destroy it once again. Not a single word about a threat, certainly not an existential threat, but everything about an opportunity, and how the fact that the Egyptians have come closer to our borders make it easier for the Israeli army to destroy it, and therefore the generals were pushing for war. And my father was one of the more vocal generals who pushed for the war. As we know, of course, the battles against the war against the Egyptians lasted just several days. The Egyptian army was destroyed, as the generals predicted. And then on their own, they took the West Bank, which they'd wanted for a very long time, and the Golan Heights, which is another area that they wanted for a very long time. They decided this on their own because they wanted this land for a very long time. Now, in 6 days, it was all over. In 6 days. So can you imagine a small country being attacked by 3 Arab armies, ending a war of that magnitude in 6 days, tripling the size of the country, destroying 3 Arab armies, killing 15,000 Arab soldiers, 15,000 Arab soldiers killed, excuse me, at a loss of 700 soldiers to themselves. Now, every soldier that dies is somebody's child, and so it's a tragedy. But the difference between 700 and 15,000 is quite striking. And then we understand why. The Israeli army was not only prepared, but ready and wanting a war. The other Arab armies had no, war was not on their issue at all. Was not part of their planning at all. And this is what happened. At the end of 1967, all of Palestine was conquered. Another aspect, the ethnic cleansing, just like the ethnic cleansing took place in 48, ethnic cleansing continued and destruction in the West Bank. So hundreds of thousands were expelled, towns and cities were destroyed, and a massive building began for Israelis only in the West Bank, just like it was done in the rest of Palestine after 48. So when people talk about the possibility of what they call a two-state solution, where Israel will allow the Palestinians their own state in the West Bank, it's absurd. Because this is not something Israel will ever do. It's not part of what Zionism is about. It's about claiming, or as they say, reclaiming what they call the land of Israel, or we, the Israelis, call the land of Israel, and turning it into a Jewish state. All of it. So the conquest was done, the ethnic cleansing goes on to this day, and then there's a de-Arabizing of the country, because this is a country that's been an Arab country for 1,500 years. So the names are being changed, population is being changed, monuments are being destroyed, and so forth, so that they can make this ridiculous connection between Israel and the Jewish people today and the ancient Hebrews. And there are plenty of examples of that that we can see today. Now, I'll say another word about my father. After he retired from the military after the war, he retired a year after the war, he began talking about the need to solve the Palestinian problem through the two-state solution. And in the 70s and 80s, he was part of a group of Israelis who had this very significant dialogue with prominent members of the PLO. You may have heard of Uri Avneri, who was another Israeli that was part of that, and so forth. And for about 20 years, this went on. And when they would return from their meetings, these were meetings that were held in Europe and North Africa, because the PLO was an illegal entity in those days. They would always report back to the Israeli government. So the Israeli government was aware that this was taking place. Yet for 20 years, they did not want to have anything to do with it. In fact, in the 80s, the Knesset passed a law making it illegal for these meetings to go on. Yet in 1993, at the end of 1993, Rabin and Arafat signed the Oslo Accord, and everybody thought Rabin had changed. Rabin, this, old war horse, this general, finally changed. But did he really? By 1993, Israel had made sure that the West Bank was completely integrated with Israel, that there was no chance of a Palestinian state ever being established. And that is why they decided it was a good time to sign a peace agreement with the Palestinians, not to create peace and a Palestinian state, but to bring them to surrender. And there were several people who were against the Oslo Accords. Edward Said, of course, was one of them. My father was one of them. And people wondered, how could you be against this peace accord? Well, they were against it because they read it. And they realized it wasn't going to lead to peace. It was an attempt to bring the Palestinians to surrender, and that would not work. And of course it didn't. And you may recall in the year 2000, they tried to get together at Camp David and solve the problems, end this conflict and so forth, and they failed. And when they came out, Bill Clinton blamed Arafat for the failure. Saying what? What was the claim against Arafat? That he was not willing to make concessions. This is always the claim against Palestinians. They're not willing to make concessions. By agreeing to the two-state solution, they're willing to give up 80% of their own homeland and make peace with a state that destroyed their homeland. And that's called not being willing to make concessions. Of course, another one of those ridiculous double standards. There's a lot of sadness and a lot of victims, and most of them are innocent, of course. And my own personal story has to do with my sister's little girl who was killed in a suicide attack in Jerusalem in 1997. And because she was the granddaughter of a famous general and so forth, this was big news. And when my sister, her mother, finally, spoke to the, thousands of reporters who came to cover this, and she was asked about retaliation and who's responsible, she said, well, regarding retaliation, she said, no real mother would want to see this happen to any other mother. So don't talk to me about killing more people. And as for responsibility, she said, well, these two young men were brought to such a level of despair and hopelessness that they were willing to take their own lives and the lives of innocent civilians, including my daughter. But who brought them to this level of despair? She said, it was we, the Israelis. Because when you take away people's land, you destroy their homes, you throw their fathers in jail, you kill their younger brothers and sisters in the schools. This is what happens. And she said she holds the Israeli government directly responsible for her daughter's death. So now here's this Israeli mother, bereaved mother, turning everything upside down. Because what do we know to be true? We know that the Israelis are the victims, the Palestinians are the terrorists. We know the Israelis want peace, Palestinians won't make concessions. Suddenly she's turning everything upside down. And of course she became an activist, and she's been writing and talking and speaking about this for many, many years. And this was the drive for me to start learning about Palestine and traveling into Palestine and speaking and meeting with Palestinians as well. And that journey is the second part of the book. It's the journey of an Israeli in Palestine, which is a journey upon which which is still going on. The way the book ends, and the last thing I'm going to talk about tonight, is how do we move from here? Because in fact, by integrating the West Bank into Israel, Israel created what people call a one state. It is one state. It's one Jewish state over all of Palestine, or over all of the land of Israel. Israeli politicians and generals and commanders on the ground say this all the time. There's no difference between the cities in the West Bank and the cities in other parts of the country. So they've in fact created a reality where there's one state, it's the Jewish state, over all of Palestine. So where do we go? We still have two nations. We have about 6 or 6.5 million Israelis and close to 6 million Palestinians, all living within those boundaries, but living under different laws. which is why it's often compared to apartheid. You've got the laws that govern people like myself, an Israeli Jew, a complete democracy. I come, I go, I do what I do, I say what I please. You've got the laws that govern the lives of Palestinians, what are called Israeli Arabs, or the Arabs of Israel, which are the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. And there are dozens of laws that discriminate against them specifically within the Israeli law book. And you've got the Palestinians who live in the West Bank and Gaza who have no rights, no laws that protect them at all outside the realm of the Israeli military. And this is how Israel governs. So it's not a democracy because not everybody is equal under the law. So how do you go? Where do you go? What is a realistic solution? What could be more realistic? I would argue that nothing can be more realistic, nothing can be more normal than affording everybody equal rights. If we believe that there should be a Jewish state in that country, then we must accept that it cannot be a democracy. We must accept thousands and thousands of political prisoners, which is what Israel's been holding the whole time. Thousands and thousands of political prisoners that they call terrorists, even though the vast majority have never been charged with violence. The vast majority have never been charged with violence. These are political prisoners. We must accept that there will be brutal attacks against Palestinian populations, as we've seen, particularly in Gaza, for the last 65 years. They say now that they're fighting Hamas, but really, if you look at the history, attacks on Gaza began in the early 50s. Every so often, on a regular basis, Israeli army would raid Gaza, leave scores of innocent civilians dead. And we have to accept that there will always be a militant state with a large military. This is the price of having a Jewish state in an Arab country, having a Jewish state when half the population is not Jewish. Nothing could be more normal. Nothing could be better if we want to see people function than equality. So it won't be a Jewish state. But some things we just can't have. And I don't think it's bad. I think the notion of a Jewish state is really not Jewish. There's nothing Jewish about the state of Israel. There's nothing Jewish about Zionism. No Jews ever elected the Zionists to represent them. They kind of proclaim themselves to be the representatives of the Jewish people. Most Jews have never been to Israel. Even after the Holocaust, most Jews, most survivors preferred to live in other countries. Because why go from one racist state to another? So I think these are all myths that have been created for a reason. I think it's important to let ourselves, be freed from them and to put our efforts into creating a real democracy with equal rights so that Israelis and Palestinians can move on and so this conflict can finally come to an end. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. We have a Palestinian saying, the one who is not thankful to people is not thankful to God. I thank you, Michael. I thank my friend, Rob, who introduced me to many great people here in this great opportunity. I'm coming to speak with open heart and mind. And I'm sure most of you is coming with open heart, mind, and ears to listen and to understand, and what can we do? Because as a Palestinian, in our life, we face hardships, challenges, ups and downs. As a Palestinian refugee who was born, raised, and living in refugee camps as those children, that as a child, as you have seen them, I never tasted my childhood. I was born for the misery, just my life was a war. I felt I was born just to fight, fighting to survive. In a time you see in this world others who are living to fight. And that's the question, where we were born to live and to give life or to fight. But that's the hope. My suffering and other suffering in this world, it's man-made. And those who made it, what can we do to challenge them? And as the Grandma Moses said, life is what we make it. Always has been, always will be. From my early childhood, and our parents realized, in particular the Palestinian mother, who is the hero. They realized the biggest weapon to face the misery of life is education. And they invested everything in their life for education of their children to get rid of the misery of life and to say we will never accept it. And that's the resilience. Not to adjust or to accept, but to take it as a challenge and to move forward. I dreamed, because someone in this world can oppress you, can occupy you, can imprison you, can deprive you, but no one on earth can prevent us from dreaming. As a Palestinian child, I dreamed to be a medical doctor. But how can I achieve my dream? I am a refugee, as I said, fighting to survive the day. I am not sure about tomorrow, if I am going to live it or not, but I have to work hard. And life taught me that nothing is impossible in life. Everything in life I planned, I succeeded to achieve, and I continued. But life is full of surprises. And the most difficult time in my life, where we have certain numbers, we remember them. Number 16, I will never forget it. 16th of September 2008, 4:45 p.m., is the day when I lost my wife of acute disease. I thought it's the end of the world, because I fully believe children to be raised. The mother is vital and is needed for the children. And my faith taught me the orphan is not the one who loses the father. The orphan is the one who loses the mother. With the loss of the mother, we lose the big heart, the incubator who brings all together. I was the first Palestinian doctor to practice medicine in an Israeli hospital, because I believed in it. Because medicine, it has one face. It has one value and one culture. It's a human face to save life and to give life to others. The happiest moment in my life when I handle the baby to his mother. The cry of the newborn baby is a cry of hope. Cry asking us what the future is waiting for this newborn baby. I believed in it. I continued, and thanks to my daughter, Bisan, from whom I learned. She said, you have to continue your work and count on God and our support. Then the unexpected happened. 16th of January 2009, 4:45 p.m. is the day when the Israeli tank shelled to bomb my daughter's room, killing 3 daughters and 1 niece. For nothing they did. They were girls, armed with love, with education. I dreamed, but my daughters planned. I helped them to plan their life. If I have 100 of these girls, I will thank God every minute. Their teachers were fighting to have them in their classes. They never succeeded in their school, less than 97%. Bisan, who was the first Palestinian girl I sent to peace camps. Bisan is the one from whom I learned, who said, to meet violence with violence doesn't solve any problem. Bisan, who said everything starts small, then becomes big. Everything starts in one place and goes in different directions. That's why this meeting, it may be small in place, but it can spread everywhere. I don't want anyone to see what did I see at that time. Seconds after I left my daughter's room, I didn't believe it. When I saw the smoke, the dust, I realized it's my house. Those beautiful, bright, lovely girls became parts, drowning in their blood. I want to see, where is Bisan, where is Mayar, where is Aya, where is Noor? Mayar, who was #1 in math in Palestine, who planned to be a medical doctor, to follow my path. I said at least one of my daughters will follow my path, the human one. They were fighters for humanity and peace. Mayar was decapitated. But as a believer, as a Muslim with deep faith, from the first moment I said this tragedy is for good and will be invested for good. Because for 3 weeks, the world was watching what is happening in Palestine, in Gaza, seeing the bloodshed, and they don't stop it. I learned and practiced medicine when I see bleeding patient is to run to stop the bleeding, not to watch. Palestinians in Gaza at that time were just numbers, figures. They have no names. They have no faces. They have no parents. They have no plans. It's shame to look at a human being as numbers or statistics. The most precious thing in the universe is a human being. Saving one's life, we save the world. Killing one, you kill the world. When someone is killed, the screen doesn't stop from talking about that guy, about his hopes, his plans. Others are nothing. They are a group of people. They are figures, just statistics. It's time to look at a human, as equal. And from that moment, I swore to God and to my daughters, I will never rest. I will never relax. Because I fully believe one day I will meet them. But I want to meet them, to say to them, I am proud of you, as you were proud of me in my life. I want to meet them and to say to them, I didn't forget you and will never forget you. You are living with me and within me. I am coming to meet you with the big justice and the big gift, the freedom for your people and others, and the means to be used that we all are blessed to have. It's the wisdom the kind words and good deeds, the one who killed them with the bullet. I have stronger means. Words are stronger than bullets. The bullet killed once, but the word can kill every minute, every second. And it's time to look at it. When I wrote my book, I Shall Not Hate, because the people were expecting me to hate. I may have the right to hate, but we are human and we have choices. If I want to bring my daughter's justice, it's not with hate. I should be strong, determined, more focused to challenge the one who killed them, and to use a different mean that I have and each of us have with hate, which I see it as a poison, as a disease, as a toxin which destroys the one who carries it. I was a victim with killing of my daughters, but now I am not a victim anymore. I am more determined. I passed it. So don't accept in life to be a victim more than once. If someone did harm to you, you are a victim of that act. But don't accept to inject yourself with the hatred, but to be determined, what can you do to challenge the perpetrator? Because the game and the result of the game is not determined from the first minute. In soccer, if any team scored a goal at the first minute, it's not the end, it's not a guarantee that this team won the game. We have 89 minutes to wait and see. I am more determined, stronger than before. As I said, not to give up or forget. Life taught me that our enemies are our ignorance, arrogance, greed, and fear. And when we speak about violence, which for me, violence and hatred are diseases, and we look at diseases, no one is born violent. This is a way to escape responsibility, to say this is violent. Violence is a disease, and it has its causes. We need to ask 5 times why. What made this a child, or this girl, or this man to be violent? And if we want to treat the disease, we don't treat symptoms. To get rid of the disease from its roots. This world can endure, but what is needed to endure? It needs the truth and justice, because the truth is the light which shows us the way. We need to see the light and the truth and justice, not to waste our time, even in academics. Justice is to like for others what do I like for myself, to put myself in the shoe of the others. If it is acceptable for me, I accept it for others. That's justice. Then peace we are talking about, it will be a consequence of a truth and justice. Peace is not a word. Peace is a way of life where we can live it and sacrifice for it, where we engage in it, we feel it. That's why I see many people are working for peace. But I don't see peace is coming. Even it's escaping. It became like peace industry, peace business. It's time to wake up and to look at peace as action and to live it, to sacrifice for it and to believe in it. That's the peace we are missing in this world. The antidote of hatred is success. And it was proved. By whom? By my daughters. My daughter Shada, who was severely wounded, with her sisters. When I saw her wounded with her eye on her cheek and her right-handed fingers just attached by a skin tag, I said, what will happen to be Shada? Shada, during 3 weeks of the war, she was in the high school in the final year, studying day and night to be one of the top 10 in Palestine in the high school, studying on candles. She was treated in the hospital where I used to work, in Tal HaShomer Hospital. 2 days later, with the bandages over her hand and eye, she said, if I can't see by my right eye, I have my left. If I can't write by my right hand, from tomorrow to bring me pencils and papers to practice with my left hand. She spent 4 months in the hospital. She was discharged and she lost the sight in one eye. But she didn't lose the direction or the compass. She said, I have to go to achieve the plans of my sisters. She did the high school exam in Palestine with all the difficulties. And she succeeded as nothing happened. She succeeded, 96%. What is Shada doing now? She is studying computer engineering at the University of Toronto. That's the challenge. That's the success. That's the determination. Not to give up and not to look backwards. As Einstein said, life is like riding a bicycle. To keep balanced, we must keep moving. Personally, and my children, they kept moving faster, stronger, more determined, and not to forget our beloved daughters and to keep them alive because they are part of me. They are living with me. I see them, I talk to them, they energize me. From here, I send them prayers and the blessing that you are living within me. And I will continue where I am devoting my life for them and others. That's what is needed. It's good that we are meeting, and everything starts by words. As a doctor, as I said, I will never lose hope as long as the patient is still alive. Maybe the situation is difficult, but we need to ask, maybe the diagnosis is wrong, the treatment is wrong. What can we do to make a difference? We succeeded in this world to defeat cancers, to defeat HIV/AIDS, to defeat many diseases. And this violence, this conflict can be defeated. But what do we need? Is to have the truth and to act. Doctors and patients, they are not equal. And the patient is not coming just to hear some words. He needs, by the end of the day, prescription to be cured and to be healed. If just to continue to give words, the patient will never come back. So it's a matter of action. And to remind you that in this globe, there is a place and a good life for each of us. We all in this world are passengers, not passengers and the crew. And no one is far from risk. Maybe we are far by distance, but violence and diseases cross barriers and borders. It's time to proact and to prevent and to stand for the freedom of all. No one is free as long as others are not. Others' freedom is from my freedom. It's time to defend the freedom. That's what is needed. And to speak out and loudly. And to remind you of the saying of Martin Niemöller, the German Protestant theologist, who said at the times of the Nazis, they came first. They came first for the communists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the Catholic. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Catholic. Then they came for me. Sadly, by that time, no one was left to speak out to. How many people should be killed till we raise our voice? How long are we going to turn a deaf ears and the blind eyes to make an action and to act and to save lives? It's time to proact and to prevent. We don't want to treat and manage. And when we protect others' lives, we protect ourselves. In my life, I am in debt to my mother, my wife, and my daughters, without whom I will never be here. I will never achieve what did I achieve in my life. And I would love, sometimes, if they can come for a second, to come from their graves, to see that I didn't forget them, and that I am proud of them. That's why, in memory of Bisan, Mayar, Aya, and Noor, Daughters for Life Foundation was established for education of girls and women from the Middle East. This world can endure with education of girls and women. If you go to any country and to want to ask about that country, ask about the level of women's education and women's role. It's not women's rights or status, the role in shaping and decision making. It's not the GDP. Many countries, they have highest GDP, but they are not safe or secure. And violence is endemic in these countries. So it's time to try. Let us try to give the women the role. And I am sure, if they didn't succeed, they will never make it worse as it is now. Give me 5 women in the history who were behind a disaster. We as men and women, we are here to complement each other, to support each other, not to compete. We were created from Adam and Eve and became nations and the tribes to build and construct and to share. That's why Daughters for Life was established for girls who are succeeding from hardship. I want to see the plans of Bisan, Mayar, Aya, and Noor fulfilled by other girls. It's not the biology. It's the humanity. I see these girls as my daughters. They are daughters for life and will be like that. We started to spread, and I hope to see any of the Daughters of Life girls to be at Brown University, where we are looking to partner with universities to give scholarships for these girls to make the impact in their home countries and to make a difference in others' lives and to prove that this tragedy is for good and was invested for good. At that moment, the peace we are looking for, we can live it. Peace where all people are safe, secure, free, healthy, and happy. Peace that is by choice, not but by force. Peace that is good for all, not just and good for one. And in our life, we have priorities. The priority in life is not the past. It's the present and the future. The past is there to learn from it. When I take the medical history of the patient to reach accurate diagnosis and to build the present and the future of the patient, who is the priority? Also, our children, who are the hope. So I came here in this holy academic place because I believe in you, in the students who are the new and the blood and will be the leaders of the future. Have faith, have hope, but most important is to act. At that moment, this world will be the one we want for ourselves and our future children. Thank you, and God bless you.
I'd like to invite Mariam Said and Daniel Barenboim to make some remarks. There is no clear program, but one topic that came up in a conversation earlier today was the opportunity that a group of musicians from European orchestras had to play in Gaza recently, and that might be something that either one of you might like to say something about. And then after these remarks, we'll have time for questions.
I want to thank both Dr. Izzeldin, I'm emotionally a bit, Dr. Izzeldin and Miko for this wonderful presentation. And I just want to mention that when Daniel and Edward first started this project, they started it because they themselves had become friends, and the first thing that happened was to break the wall of hatred that was created for both of them. One was Israeli and the other was Palestinian. And the project aim was to get to know the other and to break the barriers of hatred. And today we saw in front of us two people who have done that remarkably with tragic loss in their families. And to me, this was quite an experience to see them overcome hatred, because it isn't easy at all to overcome hatred. And again, I thank you. And as Michael mentioned, we were talking about a musical project in Gaza, and how Daniel brought a group of foreign musicians, and they went to Gaza and performed a concert there for the people. And I guess I will leave it to Daniel to talk about that. And this was another way of breaking a barrier, of going to a place that was being cut off from the world, not only by wars and violence, but also by the siege and the blockade that was enforced on them. And how they, as Izzeldin said, they all were resilient, welcoming, and appreciative of the endeavor. And we saw human beings and not what the media describes them as terrorists. So this is what I have to say, and Daniel.
Thank you very much, both of you, for coming and for presenting such a moving, personal story, quite apart from other very intelligent general remarks. But it is the human side of your story which, of course, leaves one completely open mouth at how one can continue living and how out of these terrible tragedies something has to be constructed. And in many ways, you know, if I can make a very small allusion to my personal development, as you may know, I started playing very young. I played my first concert when I was 7 years old. And my father was criticized quite a lot. He was my teacher for letting me play music that was known to be well beyond the capacity of a child to understand it. Late Beethoven sonatas at the age of 11 and 12, when you need a whole lifetime experience for that. And so I was faced from a very early age on with the problem of what does one learn from life for music to be a musician, and what does one learn from music for life. And the problem, very often, that's what we talk today at lunchtime, is that music is more and more in an ivory tower. It is, as it were, unrelated to the real life. And you see, not because of that, not any less passionate, either from the side of the musicians who perform, nor from the side of the public. They are extraordinarily passionate about it, but as if it was a thing in itself. And music does give us these opposite tools. It gives us a tool to forget reality, to forget unpleasant things, to forget anything that we rather not have anything to deal with. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's soothing. It's soothing. As I was saying to our friend today, you know, just imagine a day a working person gets up in the morning having had a very bad night with too little sleep, having a fight with his wife, going to the office, having a terrible time with all the personnel in the office. Nothing works. Everything is wrong. The food for lunch is terrible. In the afternoon, he goes first of all to the tax inspector, who tells him that he owes a lot of money. And then he goes to the dentist, who really... And he finally gets home at 7 o'clock in the evening, puts his feet up, gets a double whiskey, and puts on a record of Chopin Nocturne, preferably played by me, of course. And he forgets all that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. But this is not healing. That was our argument. That it's not healing. This is just forgetting. And I believe that music has another side, which is in many ways more important. And of course, this is the side that I was fortunate to learn, because I had to learn from the music. I had to learn how to go, if you want, not from tragedy in the sense that you have experienced it, but from darkness into light. And when we play the Fourth Symphony of Beethoven tomorrow in the rehearsal, that's what we do in the introduction. It starts from total chaos. You don't know where you are. And you find your way into order. You find your way into something positive. And all these thoughts were coming to me as I heard you both speak today. Look, I think there's very little point here today to try and define what is the correct solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm sure if any one of us had the real answer to that, he wouldn't be here, but he would be in the region making it work. One thing is for sure, that one of the main reasons, or several of the main reasons why this problem has not been solved, is that it has been treated by the whole world as something which it is not. It has been treated as a conflict between two nations, political conflict between two nations, like between Germany and France after the war, etc. What are conflicts between two nations? They are conflicts about borders, about water, about petrol, about those things. But we don't have this kind of a situation. We don't have this kind of a situation. We have a situation of two people who, rightly or wrongly, feel they have the right to live in the same little piece of land. How do you want to make a compromise about that? Because they don't believe they have a right to live in the same piece of land. They believe they have the exclusive right to live in the same piece of land. There's nothing wrong with living with it. And I don't want to go through all the things which many of you know and think how it developed, that in the time of the First World War, the Jewish population was only 15% of the population. All the things which we know and we've gone through, and Miko's reminded us of so many things. Of course. But one thing is for sure. I think every Israeli has the right to be unhappy, if you want, that Palestinian people don't want to give them the exclusive right to live in what they consider their land. I can take that. But nobody has a right to compare Palestinians' rejection even of the right of Jews to live in that part of the world, to compare that with European anti-Semitism. And if there is something that shows to me that moral and strategy go hand in hand in this conflict, more than in many other conflicts, it is precisely that. And this is one of the great problems. My family moved to Israel in 1952. I was 10 years old. The word Holocaust was never mentioned, because the children my age who went to school, they were not interested in hearing that. Many of them were saying to their parents, why didn't you stand up? Why did you let the Nazis kill you? Why did you do this? They did. We don't want to be like this. We want to create a new profile of a healthy, normal Jew with a normal state. In a normal state, there are also people of other religions or other groups, but this was not talked about. But it doesn't matter. The parents wouldn't talk about the Holocaust because it was too painful. It was 7 years after the end of the war. In Israel, they started talking about the Holocaust after the 60s, when there was a reparation from Germany, when there was the Eichmann process, etc. And now the Holocaust is being completely politicized. It is a horrible thing to say, and I'm very much aware of it, but it is. You cannot say that we have to fight against this and against that and against the Palestinians in order to avoid a second Holocaust. What was the whole point of creating the State of Israel? People who talk about that are not patriots. A real Israeli patriot would say, we have now our own country, we want to live normally with other people too. We are in the 21st century and we are not persecuted anymore. And we have brought the ghetto mentality and put it exactly in this land. And we have not gotten rid of it. And this is what I have, my biggest problem is that, and that is morally wrong, and that is strategically wrong too. And what are we going to do now? Where is the demography? I remember one of the last talks we had with Edward present. Not many of you were here then, but he asked that question. And what do you Israelis think you are going to do with all the Palestinians, with the demography? There's nothing to discuss about this thing. There's nothing to discuss. The only thing to discuss is how do we learn two people who have been victimized. The Jews have been victimized in history, and the Palestinians have been victimized in history, and not only by the Israelis. Look at the British record throughout the 20th century. When it suited the British to be nice to the Jews because the Arabs were tilting too much towards Germany at the end of the First World War, came the Balfour Declaration. Then, when this was, they played the Arabs against the Jews because they wanted the oil and they wanted everything else that was coming from that part of the world. In 1936, when suddenly the Arabs again were getting too close to Hitler. And therefore, they played the Jews against them in order to get the Jews in the British Brigade. If you want to talk like this, the victimhood of the Palestinians is many-fold. And then they created artificially this country called Transjordan at the time. It didn't exist. So if we go from history, as you say, we will never solve it. And we have to come to a point to say, for good, for bad, we are blessed or cursed to live either side by side or together. But we cannot live back to back. What the system is, what the political thing is not something that I consider myself able to make a proposition. But I think these are the thoughts that we all have to have in our mind. And how we have to change. We have to change our own way of thinking, not only of the others. We have to change our own way of thinking. Well, then I can smoke. We have to change not only the way the Israelis think about the Palestinians and the Palestinians think about the Israelis, that too. But we have to think in order to progress, the Israelis about themselves and what they have to change, and the Palestinians about themselves. There are many aspects in this conflict which are completely asymmetrical. One is the occupier, the other is the occupied, etc. All the things which we know. But there are some things which are symmetrical. One is the lack of curiosity about the other, as Edward very often used to say. And I think the other thing is exactly that. We have to think about of ourselves. You know, I have both an Israeli and a Palestinian passport. So I'm in constant dialogue with myself like this. And I think, when I think about myself, and I think, what do my fellow Israelis who do not have had the possibility to have so much contact with Palestinians. What do I think, what would I like to tell them that I think they should think in order to understand the Palestinians better? And basically, I come always to the same point, that we have to think about ourselves. And the same thing on the Palestinian side. The Palestinians cannot now start blaming world Jewry for things which, for everything that has happened. My other son is a hip-hop musician, and he tells all the time about Arab and Palestinian and Turkish, terrible anti-Semitism in Berlin, in the hip-hop world, blaming Israel, blaming the Jews, not Israel, blaming the Jews for every possible problem in the world. This has to stop too. But that's what I mean to say. We don't have to think about how to think about the other differently. We have to learn to think how to think differently for ourselves, all of us. And then we will achieve something positive. And just to finish, it's on a personal note, maybe not modest enough, but you will forgive me, but since Michael and Mariam mentioned it, I will say, when we went to Gaza, we went with musicians from the Berlin Staatskapelle, the Berlin Philharmonic, the Vienna Philharmonic, the Scala, and the Orchestre de Paris. And it was quite an adventure. The Egyptian government, that was in May of 11, so only 3 months after the Egyptian revolution, peaceful revolution, if you want, started, and they opened the airport in Al Arish, which is one of the closest points to the Palestinian border to Gaza, and we disembarked there. It was a concert organized by the United Nations, and children from the conservatory in Gaza came to the border to receive us, and they came and played all sorts of songs and other music, Arab music, for the musicians of this very sort of distinguished European musicians. And we finally arrived, and we went to Gaza, and we arrived, and we played in a beautiful hall in the archaeological museum. What was his name? Khudari. And it was very moving. The whole situation was very moving. And then after the concert, Palestinian NGO person came to me and thanked me profusely for coming and bringing these musicians and all the things. And I said, no, we thank you, etc., etc., etc. And he insisted, no, it's very important that you came here. And he said it several times, so finally I asked him, why was it so important for you that I came here? And he gave me the greatest compliment I have ever received in my long life on the stage. He said to me, because we in Gaza, we feel the world has forgotten us. Some people remember us and they send us medicine and food, and we are very grateful for that. But then you would also do that for animals. But you, by coming with these musicians, by these wonderful musicians, reminded us that we are human beings. And you know, I have never had, not in Carnegie Hall and not in the Salzburg Festival or anywhere, where I've not suffered from lack of compliments. I've never had a compliment that had touched me quite so much. So this is, I think, what they want. But I should stop now because you know what I think. You heard me say so many times. And we have two very distinguished guests. And I would like everybody to have the maximum opportunity to ask questions of them. And maybe of them to ask questions of you. Thank you very much. Who has the first brave question? There are the microphones. Miko, you want to ask a question? Don't tell me after this evening you have no questions to ask of this distinguished gentleman. Yes. Yes. Mina is from Egypt and he's a violinist.
Thank you for the presentation, and I can only represent myself. Really, I was very touched by what you said, and the fact that there was no intention of hurting anybody or throwing blame at anybody, but rather you both laid facts out and you tried to be as objective as you can, even though you had obviously a certain point of view. When you asked in the beginning how many people believe, I raised my hand, you know, thinking that there would be no solution in my lifetime. But that's before I knew about your project with girls. So I think now I would like to make, you know, a change to the other side. So that's number one. Number two, I do understand the essence of the problem comes from what happened in '48, and there was a big deception there. But growing up in Egypt and told by my father and my uncle and most of my family, there is a great deal of recklessness. There was a great deal of recklessness on part of the Arab countries that fueled into the problem, or fueled the problem, made it worse. It did not cause it, but it made it worse. And it was always greedy people that wanted, that had interest, personal interest, particularly, or political interest. And my question to you would be, we need to reconcile with this ourselves, and we need to also know that even though it does look like there is a victim, obvious victim here, but even the victim can do something other than hope and determination, what we talked about. How do you see, for example, what is happening in Egypt now and all the revolution? How do you see the political situation not being in favor of the situation and of what you're striving for? This is a very difficult formula to solve, because it looks like as if every political system, not just in the Middle East, but in the whole world, is against the resolution of the conflict. And I don't know what you think about reconciling these political systems or coming to a conclusion about that.
Thank you. Being from Egypt, I got my MD from Cairo University, and I think thanks to the Egyptians, they have an active role in supporting the Palestinians, and I think without the support in education, and most of the Palestinian people were educated mostly in Egypt. But as you have seen, the Palestinian cause, many stakeholders are engaged in the Palestinian cause. Each of them, they use the Palestinian flag when they want for their own interest. And I think the Palestinian leadership, they realized that, and that's why they said it's time to carry Palestinian flag and to take responsibility and to give concession of 80% of the historical Palestine and to have the peace agreement, the Oslo peace agreement. But even that didn't resonate with others. They didn't accept it. Until now, it's not going. So I think it's time, we need leaders. It's a problem of leaders. And what do we call the Arab Spring, where we need reform, we need a change. But I will speak about Egypt. The Egyptians, what do they need? They don't need democracy. They need a freedom of hunger, freedom of sickness, of unemployment. They need houses. They need to live their life. Democracy doesn't feed. We must think of what are the needs and what are the priorities of people, not to continue with this game, democracy, just the vote. Even democracy, I should be free to elect the one I want. What do I mean by free? To elect on evidence-based practice. I know whom I am going to elect. I know the person. Not blindly to ask me, I don't know who is going. That's what is needed. That's why the change is good. At least it has one good thing. It proved that these regimes, military regimes, tyrannic regimes, and any other military regime will never stay forever. You can oppress someone 10, 20, 30 years. At the end, tyranny has an end. And fear has no place in the hearts of whom? The young men and women like you. We thought they are busy in nightclubs with computers, with others. Once they started to take the initiative and to expose their chest, if you want to kill, you can kill. And the weakest is the one who is carrying the gun. They can't do it. So it's time for leaders. Which leaders? We need political leaders, but leaders who are accountable to us, human leaders who are not thinking of being re-elected and to keep in power. We need leaders who think of their people and give the freedom for all, and they are risk takers. They can challenge and sacrifice their position for the sake of freedom and justice of their people.
Excuse my voice again. A couple of things I would say about this. One, like Dr. Izzeldin alluded, most of the Arab countries have not been able to choose their own leaders. From the very beginning of the creation of some of the states, the Arab states in the Middle East, their leaders were imposed upon them. So they were always living under these dictatorships that they could not oppose because they were supported either by the US or by the British or by Israel. So we're saying something new here where perhaps people in the Arab countries might have a political voice, but that hasn't happened yet. And I think their relation to Palestine and the official Arab states' relation to Israel has been, to a large degree, impacted by the fact that their leaders do not represent the voice of the people. Egypt is a case in point, as we all know. Mubarak was collaborated with Israel and collaborated with the U.S. We don't know about this new regime yet. We'll have to find out. Just from personal experience and the experience of Palestinians that I know, the treatment of Palestinians by the Egyptian authorities has not been kind. So we'll have to see how that develops. I think to a large degree, certainly this is true in other Arab countries as well. To a large degree, I think this is even true with the Palestinian leadership, because if we look at Oslo in the years since Oslo, Israel has always made it clear. And this is, in Israel, I'm saying, the most peace-leaning Zionist governments, Israeli governments, made it absolutely clear that they will only negotiate with the Palestinian leaders that they pick. They will only negotiate with Palestinian leadership that they are willing to talk to. So to a large degree, even Palestinians who have slightly more of a tradition of democracy, have not been able to be represented by leaders that they really want. And of course, they did have elections a couple of times, but then they couldn't have re-elections at the time that they should have because, again, Israel won't allow it. So there have been all these complications. And once again, we're faced with a reality where we can't really say necessarily that the leadership, even the Palestinian leadership, represents the will of the people. So it's very convoluted, and once again, and again, if you didn't hear me blame and accuse, then maybe you didn't hear me properly, because I do blame and accuse the Israeli government for this conflict and for this mess and for the violence and for this very convoluted situation where, once again, Palestinians are unable to elect their own representative governments, even though they should have been able to. And also there's this disunity, which was clearly armed and put in place in many other ways, not just arms, but other ways, by Israel. You know, the fragmentation of the Palestinian political leadership and Palestinian society to a large degree has been an Israeli policy from the very beginning. And you see that in many different ways. And I won't get into that. But that is one of the biggest achievements of the State of Israel, the fragmentation of Palestinians from one another and the fragmentation of Palestinian political leadership as well. So that's one of the reasons this has been, you know, the way the Arab states have related to Palestine is to a large degree a result of that.
Thanks.
Hello, thank you for this wonderful evening. One thing that hasn't really been focused on is this wonderful group here of young people. Being an older person, I have great value and respect in youth, and I think your project of bringing the peoples together and to play music together is extraordinary. I work as a mediator, so I know that there's always right and wrong on both sides, and I try to, as much as I can, even though I am Jewish, to see the whole picture. But I just would like to say, how can you negotiate with people or governments who say you don't exist?
It's good that you are mediator and you were talking about reconciliation. Reconciliation, it has two directions, between two partners, or you can reconcile with yourself, and you need to be honest with yourself and know the truth, because the truth is needed before reconciliation. We should not start any process of reconciliation before knowing the truth, and we can't start doing any surgery before stopping the bleeding. The violence and the conflict must be solved, and then the process of reconciliation, which is the rehabilitation process, you can start it. As long as the conflict is ongoing, I think reconciliation is not efficient or effective. What did you say concerning existence? For me as a Palestinian, I don't ask anyone on earth to recognize my existence. I am existing. As long as I am breathing, living, running, I don't ask. I want to ask people to give me my freedom and to recognize my independence in a state. Existence is not asked for. We ask to live a free and independent borders. That's what is needed. I think what is needed, the Palestinians to be recognized in living in a state. PLO recognized the existence of Israel. When they have the Oslo Agreement, it was built that we don't accept, even as Edward said, they didn't accept because it's not the right. They recognized the existence of Israel as an independent state on the borders of 1967. We as Palestinians, we are asking to recognize us. As Daniel said, to look at us as a human being, and we deserve life and to live free, equally, side by side, to the part which is recognized, which has the power. This is one thing. And this is a question all of the time. No one is right or wrong. And I can tell you the story. A newly married couple, they moved to their new house in the honeymoon, enjoying it. In their house, every morning, the wife is bringing the breakfast to the husband in the salon and looking from the windows to see their neighbors an old woman hanging the clothes, which is dirty. So the wife is saying to her husband, look, our neighbor, she's an old lady, hanging it, it's dirty. What can we do? Can we go to help them, to tell them? He said, please, forget it. What? It's not our business. The first day, the second day, the third day, after 2 weeks, she is coming, bringing the breakfast, looking from the window. Said to him, something changed today. It's clean today. I think they learned or someone helped them. He said, yes, there is a change. I cleaned our window. So I think it's time for each of us to clean his window and to see things in the right way.
That's a great story. Excuse me again for my voice. I think, first of all, I do want to recognize this wonderful group of young people here who are part of this, and the reason we're all here, this orchestra, and commend you all for the effort in doing what you're doing. I think it's immensely important. There's no question about that. The issue of the recognition, I was participating in a debate with a Jewish professor from I forget which university. And part of his argument was that there is no Palestinian people. The PLO made it up in the 19s. Yasser Arafat made up the Palestinian people in the 1960s. And it reminded me of something that a story that has to do with my father. In 1970, I think it was 1972, Golda Meir, in a lecture, when she was the prime minister.
September 70. It was Black September, that's when she said it. We are the Palestinian people.
No, I'm talking about something else she said.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. She made several stupid remarks. This particular one, she said she had never heard of Palestinians until 1967. And my father, in an article that he wrote in the Israeli paper Ma'ariv, said, it's very interesting because before she was prime minister, she was foreign minister. And before that, she was an ambassador. And he said, is it really possible that when she was out there in the world, she didn't hear about the Palestinian people? I mean, is it really possible? It sounds quite amazing. And of course, he was referring to the fact that if you haven't heard of the Palestinian people and you don't know that Palestinians are a people, that only reflects on your stupidity and your own ignorance. So that was, that has to do with the fact that people still talk about this absurd notion that there is no Palestinian people. And again, it's a part of this effort on the side of Israel and Israeli politicians and pro-Israel people who support Israel to say, well, there is no Palestinian people, therefore they have no right to the land. But as to your specific questions, how do you negotiate with people who don't recognize you? I don't think you should. I don't think the Palestinians should negotiate with the state of Israel. I really don't think they should. I think it's a big mistake, and it's proven to lead to nowhere.
I think we're all anticipating that you'll continue that sentence and to say who should they should negotiate with, and then I'll ask my question.
Okay, well, I think, like I said earlier, the state of Israel and Israeli governments over the last 65 years have made it absolutely clear that they will not recognize any Palestinian political entity and will never allow any Palestinian political framework within what Israel considered as the land of Israel, which is, of course, historic Palestine as well. And they've shown this, like I said, today's government, whoever ends up heading it, which looks like it might be Netanyahu, is really no different than Ben-Gurion and Golda Meir and all the others, because they all had the exact same point of view in relation to the Palestinian issue. The land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people. We conquered it so that all Jewish people may have the right to return. The Arabs of Israel, as they're referred to by, in Zionism and Zionist lingo, are just Arabs who happen to be in Israel. They have no connection to the land, which is why they were given this name by Israel. The Arabs of Israel are they're the wrong people. When they said the people without a country to a country without a people, they didn't mean that there were no people in the country. They meant that those people are the wrong people. So Israel will not recognize the right of the Palestinians. It never has. The best Israel was ever willing to do was, like I said, pick the people with whom they will negotiate, pick the areas within the West Bank where Palestinians may have some limited autonomy, and the level of autonomy will be determined by Israel. And they will never negotiate. They've got these three no's, which is they will never negotiate on the Jordan River Valley. They will never negotiate on the expanded boundaries of Jerusalem. And they will never negotiate on the major settlement blocks. Now, all of those put together is the majority of the West Bank. So clearly, Israel is not interested in a peaceful resolution. So the solution has to be beyond Zionism. The only solution that I see is a solution where there's a peace, but there is no Zionist state. It's just like apartheid had to be dismantled in South Africa for a peaceful resolution of the South African issue. And once apartheid fell apart or was dismantled, and people could vote as equals, that you could move forward. So I don't see there ever being a negotiated settlement, and I don't think Palestinians should agree to negotiate with Israel, particularly since Israel is continuing to build settlements all over Palestine and continues its violent assaults against all Palestinians, but particularly now, over the last few years in Gaza. So that's the end of that sentence.
But it's good to mention the negotiation. Negotiation for what? Negotiation is a mean to an end. Negotiation is to achieve a goal. Negotiation is not a goal, just to keep negotiating and talking, because we know the problem. And what is the solution? It has been set up. What is needed is the implementation. It's like the patient and the doctor, the diagnosis is clear. We know what kind of a treatment do we want, what operation do we want, what is needed, and the patient gave the consent for the operation. But what is needed from the surgeon to free himself to come to do the surgery? It's the implementation of the international resolutions and what have been agreed upon. But the issue of negotiation, for the sake of negotiation, I think it's injustice and it's a waste of time because, as you said, we Palestinians and Israelis, we are not equal. The one who is suffering, the woman who is in labor, and the doctor who is waiting, and to come to say to the woman in labor, in agony, in pain, please, keep patient, keep strong. I don't feel her pain. So we must translate these negotiations into actions and to implement it.
So I'm just, you have extraordinarily powerful personal stories, but in the end you sublimated them to the higher and more abstract causes of truth, which you said is light, and justice, and based on a humanistic sense of a reasoned discourse, that somehow if people knew the truth and appreciated justice and could think reasonably, then they would themselves perhaps have a moment of transformation similar to the ones that happened to you. And I can see how this plays very well in a university setting, because a university setting is this protected space in which people are encouraged to think critically, to challenge received wisdoms, and to transform themselves as they grow and mature. And I've devoted my life to this as well as a teacher, and I understand it and appreciate it very much. And my question to you is this: does your message resonate outside of the classroom, outside of the college? Can you share a little bit with us how you are received and what happens to you when you try to reach a different kind of audience? Let's say a national audience on national media, or different kind of groups of audiences. What have been your experiences?
Can we go first? Well, that's a good point. I speak quite often, quite a lot now, as you can tell from my voice. And I had my first experience speaking in front of an Arab audience in an Arab country. I was in Amman. I had a few presentations in Amman, Jordan, and I had 2 presentations in Gaza. And especially going in and out of Israel and into Arab countries, it's incredibly, I found it incredibly, I found it incredible how hopeful Arab audiences are, even in Gaza, and how uplifting it was for me, because the discussion and the discourse within at least the Arab audiences that I was exposed to are all about how do we move on, how do we negotiate, where's the negotiating going to lead, how do we move on beyond this, how do we end the violence. That's the discourse. In Israel, the discourse is, how many more do we kill? How often are we going to go in there and kill them? Are we killing enough of them? Are we attacking enough? We need to go in there and kill some more. We need to go in there and attack some more. And we need to separate us from them. So it's a stark difference between those two. I also speak at a lot of churches. And as I'm sure you know, here in the US, several of the big churches have decided to have taken a very brave stance on this issue, supporting BDS, for example. The Presbyterian Church...
boycotts.
Yeah, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. So the movement to apply boycott, divestment, and sanctions on Israel as a state. So the Presbyterian Church, for example, had several debates on this. They invited people like myself and others, knowing full well what my stance is. And they voted, almost voted for divestment, but then they voted for boycott, which is an important step. Other churches are going in that direction. They're having serious discussions on this issue. The Methodists are as well. I know the Episcopalians are as well. So churches are moving on. And the interesting thing with churches is, of course, not so much the Presbyterians and the Episcopalians, but others have this thing where they come up and they say things like, yes, but God promised you the land. You know, God said that the Jews have to have their own, they have to return and all this. So they see this as kind of a religious issue. And my answer to them is, well, if that's God, if that is what God wanted, then that means God also wants to see political prisoners, and that means God also wants to see massive attacks on civilians, and that means God wants to see a reality where there is no justice. So if that's what you believe, that's what you believe. And I've also spoken in front of I've had a lot of opportunity to speak outside like you say, outside the classroom, in people which are not kind of academic environments. And the biggest thing that I hear from non-Jews is, well, you can say this because you're Jewish and you're an Israeli. If we say this, then we're called anti-Semitic. Or if we happen to be Arabs and we say this, then of course we're biased. And it's a very interesting tactic that the pro-Israeli groups are using, where if somebody criticizes Israel, they are attacked as being anti-Semitic. And it's very powerful and it's very effective. Again, my answer to that would be, or is, well, if attacking Israel or criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic, what does it mean when you support Israel? Because if you're supporting Israel, you're supporting a state that drops hundreds and tons of bombs, hundreds of tons of bombs on a civilian population in Gaza, for example, knowing they're going to kill civilians. The tank that shot into the room where Dr. Izzeldin's daughters were knew he was going to kill civilians. The pilots that dropped the bombs on Gaza, hundreds of tons of bombs, know they're going to kill civilians. Their commanders know that, and the politicians made the decisions to know that. So what does it make you when you support that kind of a state? So these are the kinds of things that come up. Like I said, that's kind of been the range of experience that I've had in speaking outside the classroom.
Yeah. Concerning, the message resonates from my experience with the book, which is now in about 22 languages, spreading everywhere because it's a human message. Also, it's not about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is part of it, but I receive on a daily basis emails from many people where it impacted them. And just a few days from an Israeli woman to say, Izzeldin, I read your book. Till the time of the war, I supported the war. when I saw your daughters killed. It was a turning point in my life. The elections were a few days ago. She said, I know Palestinians are denied the right of voting. I want to give my vote to a Palestinian. I would love if you accept to give this vote in your name. She's an Israeli woman. In Canada, everywhere, I see the impact. And the book now, it's a play in Israel at the National Habima Theater. It impacts. Everything starts small, then becomes big. We are not expecting the change overnight. But also, is it the responsibility of one? It's the responsibility of each of us. Each of us can do something. Let all of us do his part. At that moment, we can make the change. These grassroots can impact, but we need also at the same time the political will and to impose the right solutions on the politicians, not to watch them and to say, what can we do? What makes the evil flourish is good people to do nothing and just to blame.
There is one thing that Israelis and Arabs have in common, and they like to eat the food hot. And this is why this has to be the end of the question and answer. I see Mira, and I'm sure the other people who have very interesting and important questions. I'm sure if you go to the table where these gentlemen are sitting...
Ask, please, if you can give her... Second.
Huh? Yeah, you will ask the question in 1 second, but they will talk half an hour. Go to them at dinner.
I want to thank our guests and all of you for being here. We are going to have another discussion tomorrow at 7 o'clock, hosted by the Center for Middle East Studies. That'll be in the Martinos Auditorium in Granoff. So this discussion can continue. We'll have a chance to hear from Brown students and faculty as well as orchestra members. So hope to see you again tomorrow at 7. And thank you all very much.